Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 174th New Social Environment. I am Nick Bennett, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Brad Kahlhamer and Susan Harris. We're also thrilled to have the poet Aria Aber here, who will read to close today's program. To begin, I ask you all to join me in acknowledging the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters on which we stand. The Brooklyn Rail also recognizes the illegal annexation of the Republic of Artsakh as a grave international injustice. We stand in support of the Armenian people and the global Armenian diaspora. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprisings in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McGatty, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Toyin Salau, Walter Wallace Jr., and countless others we have lost to white supremacy and police violence in this country, and acknowledge that justice will come from the streets, from the nation demanding accountability and refusing to move on until Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the state. Before I introduce our host for today, we would like to begin with a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce today's host. Susan Harris is an independent scholar and curator with a particular focus on drawing and women artists. She is a consulting editor and board member of the Brooklyn Rail. She was the Rail guest critic of Recalling the Saints in November 2016 and managing editor of Unfinished Memories, 30 Years of Exit Art. She is executive vice president of the board of the International Association of Art Critics, ICA USA, United States section. We'll post a link on other amazing exhibitions that Susan has curated and organized in the chat. But for now, Susan, I will hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you to the whole amazing Brooklyn Rail team. I'm really happy to be here today, having a conversation with Brad Kahlhamer. I've known his drawings and loved them since the 90s, but preparing for this conversation has given me the opportunity to look at all of his work, which includes not only drawing, but painting and sculpture, music and writing, photography and installation. And now I can see it more clearly as a story about his life journey, which I want to share with everybody. In the wake of the Dakota Access Pipeline protests and the Black Lives Matter movement, which have raised awareness about the structural, environmental, and racial violence towards Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and in the context of the imprisonment of Indigenous people at the southern border, and in the context of the coronavirus pandemic's disproportionate targeting of Indigenous populations and communities of color, I think the stories that Brad tells speak to the complexities of considering what it means to be American. So Brad and I are going to take a roughly chronological approach to this conversation, but I just want to share some biographical information since it's so key to looking at his art. Brad was born in 1956 of Native American ancestry in Tucson, Arizona, where he grew up with his German-American adoptive parents and moved with them to Wisconsin, where he attended college in Oshkosh in the late 70s, early 80s. He spent 10 years as a traveling musician before he moved to New York City in 1982, and he got a job in with Topps Chewing Gum, where he came into contact with Art Spiegelman and other underground cartoonists. He left this job after 10 years and became a full-time artist in 1993, thus having had 20 years of life experience before becoming an artist. Reflecting on his Native American heritage, his formative Midwestern upbringing, and his downtown community in New York City, Brad has evolved a very personal, upbeat, and expressionist version of an American experience that is a mix of styles, codes, and cultural references that are equal parts autobiography and imagination. So, Brad, let's start in 1982 when you came to New York, and you landed a gig with a job at Topps Chewing Gum. I guess you didn't start out as a design director. Can you talk about the experience of landing in New York City and what it was like for you?
Absolutely. And first of all, thanks for that super warm introduction. Special thanks to Fong for inviting me, and Nick, and mostly the audience that's tuning in today. So yeah, that was 1982, and stepping back before that, I was playing in a road band in the Midwest, and had done a couple of small art shows, mostly in Milwaukee. And I remember when I was graduating from school, I asked somebody, I think it was my drawing instructor, as to where I should go. I was kind of caught up between West Coast and East Coast. And he handed me an Art in America. And I noticed that most of the gallery addresses were in New York City. So I decided, well, that's where I should go to and test my mettle, so to speak. So, I played a bunch of gigs. I was pretty much a full-time musician at that time, and raised about $1,000 in cash, loaded up my little pickup truck with a friend of mine, moved out, started driving out. I broke down in I don't know if it was Vermont, I think, or something. I can't even remember, but truck broke down, and I took a train down to New York City, then met a family friend who looked at my scrappy little portfolio and said I should really stay in New York City. Quickly ran out of money, $300 in cash. I answered an ad, I think it was in the Village Voice at that time, to go to Topps Chewing Gum, which was way out in Brooklyn, 36th Street. And sure enough, I got hired almost right away. Fast forward to Artie Spiegelman picking me out of this little paste-up bullpen and asking me if I would work with he and his underground cartoonists, his group in new product development. And I said, sure, Artie, yeah, okay. And at that time, it was very interesting. He was just birthing Mouse. He would come in and bring this loose leaf folder, and Mouse was in these plastic sheets, and he'd show it to us. And then remember he gifted me a raw cover, very early raw cover that was misprinted. Although misprinting in those days was really a desired goal, because we were all looking at early German expressionist prints and things like that, and trying to bring that spirit into the graphics world, which is what a lot of the underground comics people seem to be going for. It was an incredible time, now that I realize it. I actually met Mike Diana, who was introduced to me, very mild fellow who then got into all sorts of problems in Florida, and eventually ended up in jail for the content of his comics. But it was just a number of incredible people. And overall, I was just really struck by these underground comics' sense of mission and purpose. And I think that really stuck with me as a kind of guidepost. They were also very much interested. They sort of all despised the art world as it existed at that time, and were really interested in other forms of communication. Obviously, comics is alternative, and music as well. I knew Steven Serio as a friend. He was a drummer for Railroad Jerk, who I then saw at CBGB's, who I then played with later, not Railroad Jerk, but with my own bands. So it was just a really bubbling time. Artie would give me rides back into the city, and just threw all sorts of things at me in his car, which was hot. I don't think he had air conditioning. I remember that. That was an amazing time, amazing time.
So were you aware of, what they were doing visually and making, how did that impact your sense of drawing and their language? I mean, it seems to have influenced your own drawing, your sort of sense of space and characters and the thought clouds, but it's very complex. And I was just wondering if that was something that over time sort of seeped into your consciousness, or were you aware of it at the time as being the way you wanted to take your drawing?
At that time, I have to say I was very naive and just pretty much an open sponge. I was running around New York City, going to the clubs, which were incredible. I think really from the comics crowd in particular, was really that sense of characterization and building a narrative and telling a story, which I then connected to the super incredible I was in 1996, a ledger drawing show at the Drawing Center, which we'll talk about in a bit. But it was really formulating characters and telling a story and being very, forthright. All these guys could draw. That was one particular, if there was a connective tissue between all of us, we were all very interested in drawing as a formative,
Right.
as an experience.
Right. And so you had the job, all of you had your job at Topps and were doing, corporate jobs there, and then had this sort of underground comic world.
Right. They were all freelance, and I was eventually fairly quickly appointed to design director. So I was hiring them. And, we paid rather quickly. So for an underground cartoonist, they loved coming out, hanging out. We pay right away.
Right.
It was just, things moved very fast.
So
I just want to mention what we're seeing here on the slide program is not me necessarily being informed so much by comics architecture, but really the idea of the serial windows. And so these are bubblegum cards which I then destroyed with paint and then retaped together in this idea that I had for first phase Navajo textiles. But I was already trying to incorporate an idea of pop into this very traditional world.
They're so cool.
Batman.
Yeah. Well, in 1993, you left Topps and to become a full-time artist. And it was the early 90s, and it was just after the big market crash. So a lot of galleries in New York City had gone out of business, and alternative spaces picked up the slack. And you were included in some pretty seminal shows that were done at Exit Art, Thread Waxing Space, White Columns, and Socrates Sculpture Park. And I think we met at Exit Art, where I was a board member, and you were in a couple of really cool shows. One was It's How You Play the Game, and the Garden of Sculptural Delights in '94. Is that what this is? No. There's I think this
was very adjacent at that time.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the Garden of Earthly Delights, and this was
right.
a kind of doomsday prepper bomb shelter idea I had with the inner tubes. Of course, it's completely absurd, but it had to be big, and you had to feel somewhat secure in it. And this is a rather large piece, which I then replicated even twice as large at Socrates Sculpture Center at the time, which was really a rough urban space. It was, not the dressed up situation it is now.
Right. We talked about that Friday.
Yeah.
And those other images that were on the screen are images of thread waxing space. I remember that time too.
Right.
And all of these are quite gritty urban assemblage. Which,
I had this idea what I wanted to create a kind of alternative village or space, basically based growing up in and around Marana and Tucson, Arizona. And I think I had seen Road Warrior at that time, which, you know, the movie, which was hugely influential. And somehow I connected that rough kind of thing with Tucson growing up. But of course, wanted to create a space I could live in. And so these were, I thought I would build a model village. And then you have these larger sculptures as kind of I don't know, like a universe, you know, a sky universe or something.
so this is where you wanted to live, or it's where you lived.
Yeah, I love building these tiny little structures, and you know, you can see here's a rock concert thing. You know, it's a bit Burning Man before Burning Man, I suppose. You know, only in miniature.
Right. That's great. I do have a vague memory, well, better than vague, of that period of time. And you had your first one-person show with Bronwyn Keenan.
Right.
And I don't know if we have images from then, but you also showed there with Michael Ashkin at that period of time.
Correct. So this is an installation shot. This is Super Speaker, which you know, I think as much expresses my ongoing music practice at the time. And I was showing with David First, who was a microtonal master. And we were playing all the downtown galleries. I think we played New Math. He's gone on to quite some notoriety now, as he's cited by Sonic Youth as an early influence. We were playing very loud raucous music, but I remember David took me to see a Glenn Branca performance, which was ear shattering. I mean, literally your ears were bleeding, your stomach, you felt like vomiting. It was so loud. 33 guitars turned up at full volume. And I associated that with, you know, with a wild Western mountain, you know, ecosystem, the winds, the rain. And I felt that in Branca's performance. So how to express that was I went up to 48th Street. I knew all the music stores were up there, and I asked for all their old speaker cones and tore them up. And I wanted this again, another giant universe of sound, which is what I experienced coming off the stage. You know, the sheer pressure of the sound. And I wanted this piece to somehow recall that.
Does this piece still exist?
It does, yeah.
That is great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And you can see I have miniature speakers inside, which, you know, carried on the model practice, you know, and which would now I would equate to, you know, private to public. So it was this kind of scale shift, which I was into very early. At the same time, Michael Ashkin was making models, you know, very much more complete models in Brooklyn. And I think Bronwyn saw both of our studios within a week and, you know, put us together. And she said, you know, you know, you two are doing similar things.
Yeah, that was.
But we were not aware of each other.
That was very smart. Well, and around that time, you were asked by the Swiss Institute you were one of 10 artists of Native heritage invited by them to make works in response to this Swiss artist, Peter Rindisbacher.
Right, yeah, explorer.
Who made these naive depictions of First Nation tribes in Canada and US. Yeah. And these, I mean, this is like early 19th century. They're sort of.
Correct, yeah.
And here's an image of the piece you made, this diorama, kind of your village, another village called Old Tucson. So,
right. So
how is that a response to that?
And Old Tucson, when I was growing up in Tucson, is a very famous, notorious movie set where a lot of genre westerns were filmed, I think in the 40s and 50s. But this piece specifically responds to Rindisbacher drawing of a fort in the West, and I can't remember the name, but in my fort, that's all my hair. There's little figurines with with bits of my hair. They're sort of all in either stages of death or ecstasy.
Oh my
And so I
God.
wanted the fort to, it was just the walls, but these figures or these spirits were jumping in
Wow. And we'll see them later, but you've done some other versions of it.
Yes, yeah.
So it's interesting. Well, and in that year, 96, was this ledger drawing show that the Drawing Center did.
Mhm.
That's the book. It was this monumental show, which basically introduced, well, you, me, and the contemporary art world to this body of work. And we'll talk about what sort of influence it had on your work, on your drawings. But I just wanted to say, for people who may not know, that these Plains Indian ledger drawings illuminate this chapter in American art and history, and they combine drawing and telling. They're drawings made under assault, made by artists, and during a short period of time, between 1865 and 1910, more or less. And these were the years during the most brutal and extensive period of US government violence against Native Americans. And the artists were usually imprisoned Indigenous people, and they drew them in notebooks and ledgers that were given to them by white settlers and military men. And, faced with their own extinction, these ledger artists documented and kept alive personal narratives and myths of, tribal experience. They preserve Native Indigenous culture, and they're just resounding testaments to the fierce resilience and resistance of the Native American people. You can see these are reproductions as opposed to the images themselves, but they're remarkable. So can you talk about your memory of seeing them at the show, and then we can talk about how they might have seeped into your drawing practice?
Over the years and prior to this, I've been making numerous trips out west, sort of using New York as my studio base, and so I'd seen a number of ledger drawings, mostly in South Dakota, North Dakota, in smaller museums. There was really very little awareness of these things, which I saw, again, going back to Top, circling back and thinking that these were really America's first graphic novel. And so this was the first foundational material that I wanted to really dig down into and really analyze, and was really immediately struck by the entire cosmology, this complete universe, all contained on a rather small page. In particular, though, it was the glyphs where these ideas of well, mostly I think they centered around two exploits: one of battle and of spiritual encounters. And so these glyphs are the representation of what happens when one would go on a psychic trip, so to speak. And the lines that connected them in particular do show up in my work later on, in really significant bodies of work, I think, from 2000, and then the Dream Catchers, later on.
I think
so these were, yes?
Nick, I think we have an image of a drawing that has a glyph, which is, it's kind of like, it's kind of like a thought bubble, but makes a connection between the figure and some spiritual being. Whoops.
I mean, this show was like nearly biblical for me. It just was. I think I went down there almost daily, just to look over these things, and got the book. And then later on, I took a residency at the Bemis Art Center just to be close to the Joslin Museum, which has a ridiculous collection of these, and just an incredible collection.
You said that, they're on small sheets of paper or ledgers. And, one of the ironic things is that they were drawing on these small pieces of paper for the first time, and at the same time that they had been living, and they were living in these vast spaces, but their world was being shrunk, and they were forced onto reservations. And it seems like a metaphor and an apt scale to be working.
Yeah, you're right. You would really see them as battle maps, and in particular this one with these lines coming in on the horse and the character, and then I think I would see that as a hawk protector, or and then the crosses.
Right.
So there was this kind of vertiginous, where you're literally flying up. I would imagine the artist, flying up above prison or the camp and looking down, and then coming back down to draw these, physically draw these things. So it's not just the page moving; it's also the body of the artist moving around the piece of work.
Right. Well, and there's this simultaneity of different actions.
Yeah. I mean, I have a funny story. I was in South Dakota. I was in. They've got that big corn palace thing. I forget what town that is, but the Oscar Howe Museum is located. And I went in, and I remember the woman who was sitting at the desk took one look at me, and then she says, I need to show you something. Would you like to go into the basement? And there in the basement in the cardboard box were a number of ledger drawings, which I could just pick up. I mean, that's how casual and unknown it was, and that wasn't, really that long ago. The particular book was from the 30s, I believe. It was a later book.
Right. Wow. Well, and as we see some of your drawings, which we will, I think it will become evident that that visual language influenced you, but then of course you made it your own. Okay, so Friendly Frontier. This was your first show at Jeffrey Deitch Gallery. Well, Jeffrey is a pretty big deal, downtown dealer. It's kind of like you made the big time. What did it feel like?
I actually thought he was an English art dealer. Maybe I was confusing him with someone else. But I really didn't know him, but a friend of mine straightened out and said, oh, no, you have to let him over, because I really didn't know. I was quite naive, I think, about these upper orbits of the then art world. But he came in the door, I immediately liked him. He offered me a show right away. I mean, within 10 seconds, it was quite, maybe it was unusual. And I think, Jeffrey was really at that time, there was two things. He was trying to assemble a strong painting gallery, of which there were four of us as, more traditional oil painters. But I think within me, he saw an immediate opportunity to offer, a vision or a voice that was sorely lacking in the art world at that time. And that was Jeffrey's thing. And I think thirdly, he really saw that I was bringing a whole universe, coming in from the West, developing it in the East, and then, pushing it back out. And he was able to facilitate that push to the public in a rather big way. That first opening was amazing.
So did you both come to, the realization that it was important to, introduce you as a native artist? I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, before this moment, doesn't seem like you were publicly anyway, really, presenting yourself that way. And Jeffrey in the catalog for this show mentions in the first line, he invokes your native heritage. What is it? He talks about your Native American heritage, and then and seems very key, he writes about how you think of your paintings as being located in a third place, this meeting place between your Native American heritage and your more conventional American upbringing with your adoptive German American family. So like, and I would like you to talk about that. But so did you like come up with this together, or it just, was like obvious to both of you?
I think, I remember clearly he called me up. It was a Sunday evening, and it was just he and I in the gallery at 76 Grand, and he was typing, rather quietly at his laptop, and he just said, "Brad, sit down." It's like I was being analyzed. And he asked me a few key questions, and I mentioned that concept, first place being, I guess, a life as I had lived. Second place, had I been born and perhaps raised on a reservation in Arizona or South Dakota. And then the third place really is that combination of the two realities, which I was expressing through probably almost every facet of my work, also including, the lyrics of my music at the time. But I just remember he was quietly tapping that out. And I think the next day he sent that to me. If I was even on email at that time, I was a late joiner. But and I read it and I was like, wow, But that's the thing, with somebody like Jeffrey, he makes you stand up, and the show was really about collecting. And as I said before, we were very interested in presenting a complete universe. So it was a combination of a lot of things, and perhaps I was ready for it. I was painting strong and freely, I felt, and he recognized that.
Right. So this third place, that seems to be something that really prevails in your work. I think, it seems to me your work operates in that third place. It just wasn't this construct for the show. It's very
no, and Jeffrey's thing was really that I hadn't really gone to a professional art school. I just basically kind of stumbled through 6 years of a undergrad, a degree from Oshkosh University, wildly interrupted by music. And I think he appreciated that I wasn't coming out of Yale. I didn't have designs. Or the Royal Academy, anything. I was just, I was on a kind of a hell-bent mission to do what I did regardless. So, yeah, there was no professional track.
Right. A diamond in the rough, as it were.
Still in the rough, yeah.
Yeah, and still. But I going back to this third space, because I was thinking relative to the ledger drawings that we were just looking at, that when you think of how natives were drawing their worlds, their world visions on this space of a notebook that is like the white settler space, right? Of their lists and calculations and, a capitalist economy. And so there is, it's sort of their drawings transform that ledger book, as well as their drawing. These two cultures are sort of combining, and it creates like a third in between space as between writing and drawing and telling. And it just seems to poetically correspond to your third space.
Exactly, making that connection to kind of historic heavy lifting and innovation that those drawings had even at that time. It was a real revelation for me.
What about the title, Friendly Frontier?
So that was really coming out, because the frontier was anything but friendly.
Yeah.
So, I was coming out of the New York punk, Bowery scene, CBGBs, which was, always ironic, 24/7 irony. So I think a lot of, and then also with, Artie and the underground cartoonists, it was always that kind of snot and spit kind of attitude, that we had towards society. And so, you would lace it with a kind of confection, which was the kiddie kind of frontier, kind of Disney-esque thing.
Right.
Plus, I think the cartoon world really was very suspicious of the art world in particular. So I was really just pleased to get, a small but very stout Native contingent to the opening of Friendly Frontier. And then I also hired two of the principal singers from Silver Cloud Singers to play powwow. And I think, at that time in New York City, there was absolutely no Native representation. I think probably most people just thought it was a bit of a joke or something. But I was sort of playing in between, the real and the fake and whatnot.
Had you sought out a Native community in New York City? I mean,
at the time, I was making trips up to the American Indian Community House, which was then located on Broadway. And I would have conversations with Joanna Osborne Big Feather, and Margaret Archuleta. I think she was there early on. And we would have discussions about, the Santa Fe art market versus, the New York downtown, which were just so far apart. But it was in my mind because a lot of collectors and the New York art world would come up to me and really just mention Santa Fe as a kind of connection, which did not have much with what I was doing. And in fact, I was in opposition to that world.
Right. Well, you mentioned Margaret Archuleta. She wrote, or you had an interview with her in that catalog, the Friendly Frontier catalog. And she was curator of the museum, the Heard Museum, curator of fine art. And I was fascinated by this, like sort of her preamble, because she was saying that you as a Native person adopted out at birth represent a part of the modern Indian experience that isn't fully recognized or even acknowledged as valid in the Native world. And I mean, it wasn't a judgment, she was just saying it. And she said that you cause us to reevaluate our understanding of what it means to be Indian today. So what do you think about that?
Well, no, she was absolutely right. I even encountered, I think it was way back to the 1996 Swiss Institute show, Red River Crossing. I felt maybe some people looked at me as almost illegitimate or even inauthentic or something. But I really always saw the adopted experience as a integral part, the full spectrum of Native identity. And sure enough, if you go to, and I recommend to all the audience watching, if you get to Phoenix, to go to the Heard show, the ongoing Heard show, the boarding school installation exhibition, which details a lot of this experience. This kind of idea of the evolution of colonialism from the 20s on, and finally into the adoption policies of the 50s and 60s. And it's a very interesting thing. Most, later on, what we probably will get to this, was my post-Smithsonian delinquency platform, which I developed in a seminar in Lopewood with Thyssen Bornemisza TBA 21 Foundation, as an idea, as a grounding position outside of the Smithsonian. Where I felt I stood. And over the years, I had various encounters with people working and being paid by the Smithsonian, to man those positions within that institution, which I always thought of as a government. It's a government institution. It's not a Native institution to my mind.
Right.
And they would challenge me, or they simply didn't like my work because of. I think in particular, the work of the early 2000s was quite, violent. And I was hell-bent on presenting the impurity of the discussions, which I thought weren't being heard.
Mm. Well, you know, that raises a question that's kind of a large, comes up onto a whole larger discussion. But I was wondering if you consider, or how you consider, these questions of your own personal identity to the larger discourse of Native American art. I mean, you're just saying now that you sort of feel outside it.
Well, I think you know, when my formative years in New York, I was very much outside of it and felt that. And obviously that's changed over the last couple of years. But yeah, in a way, I just think it was more that it was more from the curatorial, you know, the non-native curatorial arm and the directors of the institutions that I was involved with here and outside in the nation, and even, you know, some degree, or less so in Europe. But there wasn't the cultural bandwidth to recognize, you know, the full spectrum of Native America as I saw it with boots on the ground. And, you know, I remember clearly, I think it was Richard Klein of the Aldrich Museum had contacted me, and he said, you know, I can give you X amount of money to travel. And he said to me, he said, you know, if you exist, that means more of you exist. And I said to Richard, I said, oh, no, I don't think so. I think I have like maybe four names in mind, and you know, they're scattered around the West. And I don't think that's enough for a group show. You know, I think he saw as a kind of, but at the time it wasn't. I felt it. You know, there just wasn't enough groundswell to put a show like this together. But he approached me very early on.
Wow.
And fine. So yeah.
And you showed with them later. We'll show images.
Well, I've been showing with the Aldrich, you know, in and out. But it was just with that particular.
Right.
You know, I thought it was too soon, and I also thought that there would not be the support. I didn't think I could get the writers. I didn't think they existed.
Well, Holland Cotter wrote about that show, and he, I wrote something down. He was speculating that your work stemmed from the tension of addressing the subject of Native America while rejecting a traditionalist vocabulary. And I'm going to quote him. Quote, how he seems to ask, can one talk through art about having an identity without using the coded visual language and symbols that the culture at large associates with, has even assigned to that identity? It is a question facing many young American artists, Black, Latino, Asian, American Indian, at present, as the say it loud identity politics of the 1990s settles in for the long, introspective, and in some ways more difficult haul. I mean, that was 1999, and he was looking at the language of your work transcending the activism of late 20th century identity politics. I wonder what he would say to that now.
You know, I think, when was the identity biennial? I think that was 96 or 97, right? So there was a very literal quality to that, which, you know, I loved the work because it ushered in, or that particular event ushered in consciousness towards the other. But I had always maintained that I wanted my work to, you know, to stick on the wall and hold your attention regardless, without a text. You know, I wanted to be fairly convincing, you know, like a great song. You know, even a good song, 3 chords, but if you have the textures right, there's a complexity to it. And so I've always wanted that. You know, now we're in a very literal age, so it's very much about almost I would say curatorial preferences, you know, being seen. But I really like, I love drawing, painting. So it's, you know, I like the complexity of it. And then the messaging simultaneously.
All right. So these are, so the images that are up now, like this is 2002. I was just say you had, you know, a major painting show in 2001 called Almost American.
Right. Yeah.
And
here's the London version. So that the show debuted in Modern Art in London, Hoxton Square. And this, I remember that, I think it was in the winter, and it was a super cold space. So I had these logs. I had this bizarre idea of like, I wanted a Turtle Island fire. I wanted to burn wood from what we know as America. And then I came in the gallery, I was finished setting up, and the assistant was already burning my logs because she was so cold, and I never had a fire for the opening. London, right?
Your American logs.
Yeah, no central heating. So.
Well, I was wondering if the title "Almost American" is that sort of like how you were expressing how you feel? Do you feel almost American? Did you feel?
Yeah, that's exactly where that came out of, was this kind of bipartisan, whatever I guess you would call it. I don't know. I just felt like you buy into some of it, but then you look at the history of Native America, which was completely ignored at the time, and then there's this almost, or maybe, and that's what I was going for with the title.
Yeah.
And traveled on to Deutsch projects, and this was a fairly major. I was doing very large scale paintings because I wanted to address the idea of the American landscape USA.
Well, I found this quote. I'm actually not quite sure where it's from, but something that you said, "I'm making landscapes that I can live in through an ongoing definition of contemporary life and art, not about America, but from America."
Yeah, I think I stole that from a friend of mine, Aaron Spangler. Are you listening? Well, I think he might. Artists talk. But I love that idea of you're coming. So you're not just conceptualizing these notions of America, race, and identity. But you're really coming out of a real space. And where I live now, Mesa, Arizona, is a real, contentious space. And I seem to really like making work in places like Alaska or Arizona, which have a very extreme polarized, population for the most part. So that's, it takes the pearl or the sand to make the pearl, right? So it's this kind of, I like operating in these kind of tense spaces.
And it's quite different than New York City.
Yeah, I mean, New York's great because we have the people, right? The conversations are at a very high level. But I think sometimes, to have a fuller spectrum, you might want to make work outside of that, which is one reason why I do so many residencies. I find them very satisfying.
Well, it's part of your wandering sensibility, wandering through the landscape of America as well. I mean, you are exposed to people, and people are exposed to you. But before moving on we have some images. I wanted to talk about your music, but just about the American landscape. You were talking about Richard Klein, and he wrote about this kind of notion in the Bowery Nation catalog that was later in 2012-13. And he said about you, firmly grounded in modern existential angst, Kahlhamer's homesickness is as much American as American Indian, reflecting the restlessness and rootlessness that has characterized much of American identity.
Yeah, I mean, he's looking at Bowery Nation, which was a work that I started in 1985, and I saw as a powwow play. I don't know if we can flip, Nick, if we can flip up to Bowery Nation. Somewhere in here.
But again, that notion, I mean, the American landscape, there is the external landscape, and then there's the American psyche, there's the inner landscape.
Right. So this was again going back to this sort of ironic kind of celebration, and this was really meant to be like a powwow float, which I had seen in a Crow Nation parade years prior, where you had vehicles outfitted in a kind of regalia of blankets and taxidermy buffalo heads and things like that. And I wanted to make this kind of spaceship traveling through space. So there's over 100. I think there's 100. Yes, 100 dolls, which I had been making from 1985, and just collected them and shown bits of them over the years. But in the end, collected all these together in this kind of spaceship float idea. And then I think there's 22 birds on the ladder. And I really like Richard's. He compared it to Calder's circus in a way. It's kind of this has I think a bit more edge to it. It was interesting. This was shown in Nelson Atkins, but when TBA 21 brought it down to Mexico, to Guadalajara, and there you have all that sort of much grittier, almost bloody context. And there I found the reaction was much more. They ran to it more. I think the Nelson Atkins kind of pushed that stage back a bit.
Right. Well, and aren't these like sort of your take on Kachina? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Right. Yeah, Katsina. So at the Heard Museum, there's the Barry Goldwater collection, which I think has 463 Katsina dolls, which he bequeathed. And I was just totally awestruck by the enormous power, the collection of all these figures and spirits. And I probably was riffing on this idea of the collective power, but really each figure has almost a cartoon, a characterization, which would go all the way back to, Tops, and then come all the way up to the Herd, but then was ultimately, made in my studio. So it's just,
yeah, they're great. And then the birds being these sort of like spirit figures or guardian figures, or protective saviors. We keep skirting around the importance of music in your life.
Oh yeah, can we go back to? I guess
so we need to go back to that, and it's related to all this with storytelling, because storytelling is at the heart of your art, and it's in your visual art, it's in the music, and your music is writing and lyrics. And so while you've talked about it some, tell us about it, and then how it doesn't seem like there are boundaries between them, but how you go from one to the other.
So around the 90s, I started writing lyrics and songs, and I would pick out lyrics and start scrawling them into the paintings as kind of titling both the paintings and the songs. It was a whole attempt to bring the worlds all together, and so I've always had guitars in the studio and played and sang, invite people over. I do little events in my studio. In fact, I'm planning another one. Hopefully soon, socially distanced, very small group. And it's just a super exciting expression. The thing about music is that, it moves so much quicker and it's so much immediate. The art world can be quite plodding, it's just it's a thing. And so I just feel super grateful to be able to bounce both worlds, kind of, juggle them.
Well, back in the 80s, when we were looking at some of those images, you have some scores. Let's see.
So we're looking for yeah. Wow. That's that was the Embracers. So that was an very early iteration when I came to New York, and I promised myself I wasn't going to get involved in a band because they're so horribly distracting. It's just but the lead singer Lanai is in the center. Had this idea. She was actually a waitress at Vasulka, which a lot of us went to. It was very cheap. food at Second Avenue and whatnot. And she asked me to join her band. It was this idea where Patti Page meets dubstep, which was super crazy. But so we had Jamaican Toaster and Michael playing bass, and we were very close to the Rasta world. In fact, we split the rehearsal space on Ludlow, which then became a Ledge Gallery, was prior to that music studio, and which we shared with Bad Brains and Modern Clicks. And I remember Gary from Bad Brains, the guitar player, really liked my style because I was fusing my country lyrics, into a reggae groove and vibe, which would have informed also my studio work.
Wow. So at
Yeah,
that,
that was quite a compliment. I was like, whoa, okay.
wow, really?
That was a wild band, those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, can you talk about National Braid? That was,
Yeah, if we could get that. So that was with Laura Ortman, and we were playing. I think we did one CD, and that was more of a countrified, much smaller electric, almost kind of an unplugged notion, which really started with. I think we developed a soundtrack for Redskins, which was the 1930s silent film.
yeah, I read that you were commissioned by the National Museum of the American Indian to write score for Redskins, which was a movie from 1929.
Oh.
And it was a child taken from his tribe.
Yes. Yeah.
To go to boarding school.
Right.
And this child became a doctor and wanted to help his people, but was banished for having become too white. And it was sort of this classic screenplay that was critical of government policies and civilized Indians. And you wrote this score for it.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you performed it with Laura.
Yeah, we debuted at the Tribeca Film Festival, and then we went on to Europe to where did we go? Pordenone Film Festival. That was very interesting, because you're playing with these very serious film aesthetes, Europeans, and I remember the violinist, because you're playing in the pit, right, an orchestra pit, and I was just, I could barely read music, but they were looking quite askance at us. We're full-fledged, symphonic European players. But we got in the pit with them, we did our own thing and then they did their thing. Playing in Prague was interesting as well. So yeah, I don't know if there's even a score. I don't even have any photos of that. So I don't think.
I wonder how that landed, on the audiences. Yeah.
I think, there were some reviews. I don't read Italian, but the Italians, I think, got into it. I have no idea to this day.
Right. Well, that is, I don't know if you wanted to play that clip or wait, just to get the sound of your music.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Where's that?
Should we put the volume down and play it?
So that was, an attempt to make Bowery Nation, that large piece with 100 dolls afloat, express it in a bigger way, and I think that also correlated. I think at the time, painters and sculptors, we were getting, the advent of video and things like that. It was more video and just try and get an image to move and talk to a wider audience. And so I started doing a succession of videos, which I still do. And that was specific to, that work.
I see. Well, just stepping back briefly for a little bit, because in 2004, 2005, you had this show, Let's Walk West, at the Scottsdale Museum of Art. And I might add that you're having a one-person show there next year at the Scottsdale Museum of Art called Swap Meet. But this was really notable, this show in 2004, 2005, because you borrowed from the Heard Museum, they're coming up a lot, 12 Plains Indian ledger drawings and showed them with your work.
Right, yeah. That was a super important show. You know, I was invited by Susan Crane. We published, I thought, a really succinct and complete catalog. But I had this idea that I wanted to go to an adjoining institution across town, which was the Heard Museum. And I was invited to go down in the basement. And I remember clearly they laid out a selection of ledger drawings, which were absolutely phenomenal. These are actually pictures from two of them. And I couldn't believe at the time that we could, I thought I could do this. It was kind of amazing. But the institutions, both Scottsdale and the Heard, loved the idea, and the Heard in particular, because they knew they were sitting on this, very important foundational material that, needed and demanded a wider audience. And so it was really just a crosstown sort of collaboration. And then the show went on to, I think, Boston. And that was, it was just a super important thing. But I do remember a lot of people thought that the drawings were actually my work. How little, awareness there was.
Right. Well, I mean, it seems kind of groundbreaking, both, well, for you, but also, and for the Heard, but for people to be able to be shown drawings of, that were made in a historical past,
Right.
and your work. And so it sort of it seems like the very beginning of something that we're seeing more now, but which started, I think, you were in a big contemporary Native American show in 2014. It was Contemporary American Indian Art, the Nerman Museum collection in Overland Park, Kansas. And so I certainly was not aware until relatively recently of shows of this nature. And you were talking about, this is a big show. You were represented, in this show with drawing from 2005. And the show was in 2014.
Yes.
But I think that it seems to be an important marker, but something that continues from that show where the Heard Museum decided to lend, the ledger drawings to be shown next to, you, a contemporary artist.
And if you notice, there's a pattern here. All these more innovative shows are really starting in the West, and sadly often remain in the West. The East Coast seems, up until recently, fairly impervious to this. And I think that's still a problem. But the one thing I like about now also making work in the West is, the conversation is more north-south. It's between the Americas. In New York, it still seems to be a European to, East-West kind of conversation. But the West, I think, has a kind of newer take, particularly now with all the cultural shifts. I think it will probably lead the way. What it lacks are, of course, the major institutions, the big budgets and things like that. But, let's hope. I think the Heard Museum is a super correct step, in that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
In a minute.
But alongside like this museum in Kansas, you were also included in a show at the Met, the Plains Indians Artists of the Earth and Sky. And this is a 2001 drawing. The show was like 2014, and that show traveled too. But it was largely, a historical
Yeah.
show. The catalog entry of this piece called Around the Camp, in which you depict a sun dance. The catalog entry says that you represent the trajectory farthest away from the traditional Plains Indian art while simultaneously referring to it.
Well, that's a fairly accurate description. Who wrote that? That was probably Gaylord Torrance, right?
Perhaps, I don't know. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
No, that was I had spoken to Gaylord. We had been talking about this probably 3 to 5 years out prior over cups of coffee and things in Kansas City, and he recognized at that time that there had to be a contemporary inclusion, and so we were sort of tossing around ideas as to who and what, and in the end, the show ended up as the show. It went through 3 institutions and then came up finally to the Met with a much bigger and I think more succinct and complete contemporary
Nice.
component. So I thought it ended well, but the show itself was amazing with the historic material, particularly the buffalo robes. And I did a talk compressing, almost 2,000 years of history for the Met.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a really great experience for me to be able to do that.
Yeah.
We had a select group come in, and I did a walkthrough. It was amazing, but extraordinary objects, which I don't know when could be gathered again.
Right.
Most of them came from the Nelson Atkins, which has an amazing collection.
Well, you were asked to write an essay on Fritz Scholder. The next year, there was a show at the Denver Museum.
Right. Yes. Lukovic asked me to contribute to the catalog, which is really my first time writing, and I have to say I really enjoyed it. The pay is fantastic, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's like, but aside from that, it was a really great way to dig down into this painter's career, which I thought he was also a bit of an outsider. I mean, I think most people from or a lot of people would probably prefer T.C. Cannon, for instance, over somebody like Fritz Scholder, but Scholder really had this kind of more outsider, almost crazy Hollywood idea, and he was also very much into the dark arts, which I could appreciate.
Oh,
Yeah, that was interesting. He also published a very little known catalog. I have a copy of it was like a photo diary that in a way reminded me of I don't know, Franz Masereel flip book, or had a bit of it was quite innovative, and but I also just appreciated that he was a full-on oil painter, and not really tethered to or untethered to the Santa Fe art market. Although he lived there, I think he also lived in Phoenix as well.
Well, I know time is moving on, but I want to make sure we get to a few other things. Nomadic Studio is something that you presented for the first time in 2016-17. It's you have been drawing in notebooks for a very long time, and it was the first time, I believe, that you presented them. You presented them then, and then later in A Nation of One. Do you want to let's look at some of the images, and maybe you can speak to them. Yeah.
So the sketchbooks, that's a long-standing practice, much like and really adjacent to something like Bowery Nation, where I'm making one object at a time, which then joins a larger collective or assembly. Skull Project, from Deitch Project, that was I don't know, 247 skulls. Now I'm approaching 100 Moleskine sketchbooks. And I sort of saw myself as well, a couple of things. I mean, it's really taking that ledger drawing experience, on the road and out of the studio. But it's really a multitude of subjects and things, and I can just, take pens and pencils really anywhere. This particular one was done in at the Headlands in Northern California, just north of San Francisco. So, and here I'm riffing on pottery designs that I think I saw at a small museum along the coast.
Well, a lot of them feel like it immerses the viewer in the landscape. I mean, I love seeing these on Instagram. It's sort of like, regardless of where we are at this crazy time, it's sort of like an instant hit of being like in the desert, or, I mean, it seems that a lot of them are, but I guess it's certainly not exclusively.
Yeah, I rarely look back at them, but when I do, it's a kind of reminder of, where one's been and the experience that maybe you felt. It's really a catalog of feelings, I suppose, as opposed to, the sort of literal reading of a, naturalistic space or something. It's not really about that. It's more the Parisian concept of the flaneur, but walking around the West.
Right. Well, we were talking about this notion, I mean, it's nomadic studio, and there's a notion of the artist traveling around the world and doing their shows here and there. I would say your travel is mostly in the American landscape, confined to there. And Christopher Green, who has written for the Rail, wrote an essay in this show that you're in at the Herd, which we'll look at in a minute, called Larger Than Memory, Contemporary Art from Indigenous North America. But he writes about survivance, a term that Anishinaabe cultural theorist Gerald Visenor coined to mean the assertion of innovative, persistent, and active indigenous survival and presence. And he said, this is becoming ubiquitous in the examination of indigenous American art today. And he also talks of Visenor's term transmotion as a sense of native motion and an active presence. And so he says, if survivance is an ongoing presence, transmotion is a related assertion of sovereignty, a visionary resistance to cultural dominance.
Yeah, I love picking up on that, of course, the motion part as it relates to, nomadic studio, or even my own, adopted body, kind of pushing myself through space as a kind of trance, moment, and positioning, as a kind of a psychological free range is what I'm doing. I was unencumbered from any particular tribal identity. So it's this freedom, this idea that I can travel back and forth. And, and I've always thought that was an advantage in a way, or a positive, not an advantage, but a positive.
Well, and that quality comes through in your art.
That's why I'm really excited to mount this show, Swap Meet, next year, because it's the idea of, the inanimate objects without ownership, and then the adopted body, and so sort of circulate.
Well, that will be exciting. I wanted to look at this show you had at the Kohler Art Space called Makeshift, where you invited your father to show his plane that he made with your dream catchers.
Right. So the dream catchers are a rather large body of work. I think the first one debuted 2012. I think it was at Jack Shaman Fort Gotham Boys and Girls Club. It was a giant 12-foot catcher. And then I made another, I think pretty significant, here it is, that centered dream catcher is about 10 feet in diameter, and it consists of powwow bells and jingles and quite rather fine wire. So it's just almost an uncountable number of dream catchers in there. When Michelle Grabner, the curator of Makeshift, approached me, it was this idea of just how one expresses, well, in my case, dreams, through an object. And the dream catchers were always taking, reaching back, taking that cartoon sensibility, the ledger drawing lines of urgency, and then adding my particular, character glyphs in a somewhat transparent structure that I would call a dream catcher. And I got the idea to invite my father, who was obsessed. You see this fox, wolf, wolf, fox. There was a drawing. This is the title of this piece, and you see the face embedded in this cosmology of dream catchers, right? Anyway, and where it related to my father's plan is that he was obsessed with flying, and he's 92 now, but he had built over the decades this plane, which still hasn't flown. I don't know if he'll ever get it up, but it does run. And so I wanted to invite, there's the back end of it, to the show. Michelle Grabner loved the idea, of inviting. I saw it as an embodiment of how two people adjacent to each other would assist their dreams in this sense. Yeah.
It's so wonderful. And the dream catchers, they look like these drawings.
Correct. Yeah.
They're pretty.
It was a really, I think it was a very satisfying show to do. My father was really, he was really taken aback about being in a museum experience. He's a huge trumper, so he would wear his regalia when he, came to install the plane. Yeah, but the installers thought that he was, super cool because he made such a cool object, right? So yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. He built this from scratch, which is just shocking. Think about it. There's actually bicycle parts in the,
really?
The steering arm. Yeah.
They look beautiful together.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just trying to think. Let's, jump to the Heard Museum, the show that you have up now.
Yep.
It's called Larger Than Memory: Contemporary Art from Indigenous North America. I love how the title comes from a poem that Joyce Harjo, she's the 2019 Poet Laureate, wrote. And the line, not the whole poem, is, "I know there is something larger than the memory of a dispossessed people. We have seen it." And, as we've been talking, this is, I think it's a significant show. I know the Heard Museum is very proud of this show. And they are, long known for their historical collection of American Indian art. And they, I think, are signaling like their intention to expand their role in deepening the understanding of, Indigenous peoples and presenting the works of living artists, and not just famous ones, but, everybody on the spectrum.
Yeah, it's actually historic. The Heard has really never done, I almost think of it as a biennial of sorts. And it's just such an honor to show them under the same roof as the incredible material that museum, offers and has collected. This work, by the way, is I'm riffing on the Kokopelli back in Mesa. And so this is a kind of largely scrambled, abstracted version of this, Western tribal icon, going way back. You find the early versions are actually on rock art.
Well, maybe we can cut to that image of the Kokopelli that you made and look at your studio in Mesa West, because I see it's 2:20 and there are a lot of questions. So while we could continue talking, I think, yeah.
Oh, so these are my zombie botanicals. So I'm making figures, I suppose protectors of a sort, out of cactus parts that I'm picking up on various hikes.
So you're actively making art. You have, in Mesa as much as
yeah.
here.
Well, this is really for I think these are going in swap meet. Suspicion. I mean, who knows? But yeah, I mean, working out west now, and it's really a full circle. As I was a kid, running around the desert in Tucson, and now I'm only a couple hours up in Mesa, basically doing the same. It's amazing how little my life has really changed.
From when you were a child. Well, that's a beautiful thing.
When I was like in the 20s, I was like, because I realized like I had around 18, 19, I was just furious on the guitar. I just want, that. And I thought to myself, I really just need to keep me at 18. And now it's like, I really just need to be 10. And here we go.
Peter Pan.
Yeah, reverse.
Okay, well, Nick, should we go to some of the
Sure.
questions?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I want to thank you both, Susan and Brad, for this wonderful conversation. This is actually a really nice segue to our first question for Natasha. Natasha, I am going to hand the mic over to you. You should be able to activate your mic now.
Hey, Brad. Thanks for. Hi.
What? Oh.
Thanks for your awesome shout out to the West. We are awesome. Out
You
here
are.
in
I
the
should
West.
mention Natasha Boaz is the curator for Swap.
So I was loving what you were saying about Swap Meet. Some of the ideas of the adopted body and the circulation of objects. And I had talked a lot about interstitial spaces, and obviously your third space is in that Swap Meet conception. I wanted to ask you, now that we're almost through, because just for everybody out there, Swap Meet was going to open this fall in 2020. And it clearly couldn't and didn't. And it's going to be opening next fall, and we're really excited about it. And I was wondering, Brad, if you could talk a little bit about the effects of this 2020 on your thinking around our conversations and our initial talks about Swap Meet, and where there might be some new content for you based on what we've all been going through for the last 8 or 9 months, and in relation to that Swap Meet space. Has it become more does it resonate more
I feel like we're writing
for
the
you
catalog
today?
Yeah,
We are.
this is very clever. Yeah, I'm going deeper, obviously, with this idea of adoption and adopted body, and I realized the Swap Meet is now open. As Mesa, I don't think you can really close. That's quite a strange place to be, but it's just these objects being swapped and then temporarily owned by. When you think about it, the Swap Meet is really the original art fair, right? It's really and with the booths which have tens. And so I started thinking about how this could be a bigger thing, and then my body, as I'm walking through Swap Meet and feeling all the super crazy feelings as you do when you see like categories of, I've broken it down in categories like Americana, a Native Americana, because you'll often see photos of like the end of the trail. Some of you in the audience will know what that iconic image is, sadly iconic image. And then, rock art or geology, zombie culture, which is what
I
I'm
love
also
those zombie
into.
pieces, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. So you see, and in that sort of randomness of the idea of swap meet, there's like various heads stuck on, bodies or things, and juxtapositions, random pairings. And I was really struck as to how that is so symbolic of our culture. And there's almost a violent kind of ripping out of, things. There's even a guitar shop there, which I played at. It's so anyway, I'm still in formation with all this, but as far as it's just given me more time, and I think there's also going to be a 26-foot trailer, which I'm going to be tricking out as a headquarters performance space, and we plan on hiring a reservation Navajo country band to come down and kick off the opening. Hopefully, we'll be able to do this. And so, yeah, it's just more time to, make it bigger, better, badder, faster.
Yeah, and we were planning on having the trailer be both a sort of site for your nomadic studio at the swap meet before it enters into the gallery space, and obviously issues of space and the public have changed so radically over this time that we've been sort of challenged by that, but you're still planning on having some kind of studio space in the galleries?
I think so. I'm in the process of inviting, and there might be some collaborative aspects of, the idea of swap meet and collaboration. But the trailer itself is actually parked in a vacant lot adjacent to the swap meet. So I'll be working pretty seriously, and recording in that trailer. So it's really like an off-site version of Smoka, but it's in Apache Junction. Should anybody care to visit, which I think there will be few.
It's an amazing experience. I look forward to going back soon and seeing you
We've
soon.
been there.
When are you?
We toured the grounds, remember?
Yeah, some very extraordinary experiences that Brad and I will be sure to talk about at various public programs in the trailer.
Yeah.
We will be doing a lot of storytelling events as well. And but I think I was really interested and intrigued, and you and I can talk off as about this afterwards, because there are other questions that need to be taken, but that you started talking about the adopted body, because I think that that's something that you've resisted in your both your life and your work, and it's a sort of new phase for you to enter into, and so that'll be interesting. So I look forward to more conversations, and thank you for taking the time and for my question, and also thank you both so much for this incredible conversation, but much appreciated. Take care. See you soon.
Look forward to seeing the show.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you.
We certainly will put some information in the chat about Swap Meet. Our next question, I am going to hand the mic over to the Rails' own Fong H. Bui.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Susan.
Hey, Fong.
Hey.
Hi, Fong.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
I have to go to another Zoom meeting. That's why I have to ask my question early.
Okay.
But thank you for the wonderful conversation. When I was a child, knowing that you had play music, and I remember clearly the first time ever been brought to a Buddhist temple by my grandmother. And I remember seeing the big gong, where the monk was about to strike, so we can all sit down and meditate. That's happened every Saturday at 4 o'clock. And I remember asking my grandma, the middle, the center, where it's intrusive point on which you hit the gong with. And I say to her, that looks like my mother's nipple. And she was so clever. She said, that's because music nurtures the soul.
Right.
And this relate to your nomadic life, because nomadic life has been associated with healing, as we know. But when I look at your painting, sometimes I see the space of anarchy. So it's a very interesting collision of different energy there, Brad. So I'd like to ask you, about that. You know, there's an anarchy of energy, spatially speaking, particularly existing more in painting than object making. But then there's a whole incredible healing prospects of it all together. So how do you know to balance it? I mean, how do you deal with that space?
You know, I'm about to paint again. I'm sort of feeling this. I tend to work in cycles, and I think it's, yeah, for painting, it's a bit more rage. You're involving your body in a large scale painting, and it's a more of a rhythmic thing. And there's something about painting that allows these sort of maybe darker thoughts to come in. And I keep thinking of the painting Loser and Clark, which I did in '99 at Friendly Frontier, and the idea of you know, those first explorations, and then later actually being on the banks of, I think it's the Missouri River in Omaha, and revisiting the site that I thought that painting was about. You know, hadn't conceptualized it, and still sort of feeling the same thing, but it was quite a bizarre feeling, because it was really looking at the river had been contoured, and all the wildness had been taken out of the river to facilitate commercial shipping, which was, you know, totally shocking. And that's what's so great about, you know, the life I have and traveling so much, is you're able to sort of see the various stages of the, you know, degradation, I suppose you could say. So, but for some reason, the painting is just, I think it's the violence of the stroke. And then those larger drawings I did around 2000, which was, oh God, what was the one drawing we had? I don't know if we saw it in the program yet, but I was able to bring that underground comics energy, anger into a larger scale, and make the private thought of the ledger drawings, those early historic, public.
Right.
And so I don't know if we can go back to that. I can't remember the name right now, but the 2004 drawing. And so, yeah, it just kind of bounces in and out. The other thing I realized, you know, when I was younger, if all you are anger and rage, it's very hard to make work. You know, it'll be very one note. So you have to kind of, you know, take a deep breath and calm yourself down, and you know, bang that gong, as you say, and take that breath, and then approach it in a very sort of measured way, and that'll still come out. You know, the thing about drawing is the hand does not lie. Right. That's such a great thing about drawing. Right. So,
because Susan and I often talk about the ledger drawings being so serene. The way in which the line has been controlled is amazingly legible, and it had that incredible calm sense of serenity that you would not associate. But then when you look at your painting, this is an anarchy of.
I think that's where, you know, downtown New York at that time met, you know, that sort of Western space and openness.
So it's charged by
the real urgency,
too, for sure.
You know, and in a sense, my aim has always been to present the impurity. Remember, I was reacting to those very first Santa Fe, you know, markets that I saw, and you know, didn't think that was really, you know, the message that was, or that message was being ignored. The alternate to that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phong.
Thanks.
I want to say we've received so many wonderful and thoughtful questions, but I do want to keep an eye on the time. So perhaps, Brad, if that's okay with you, we could transition.
We can go like 10 more minutes. I think I'm cool with that. If you want 5 more.
Okay.
But
okay.
we do have a poet reading, correct?
We do. I think we might have enough time just for one more question then. And again, I want to thank you all for sending in your questions. Unfortunately, we can't get to them all. I am going to somewhat spontaneously, Kate Ruck, I'm going to pass the mic over to you. Kate, you should be able to activate your mic now.
Hey, Brad.
Kate.
How's it going?
I'm good. Where are you, in Phoenix?
No, I'm in Michigan right now, and then I'll be in New York in a little bit.
The Mish. Got it.
Yeah. So we've talked about this before, but I'm wondering, do you think that the next evolution in Indigenous exhibitions will take place in new spaces as opposed to changes within institutions? And additionally, what is the role and responsibility of curators? Do we need, are those changes going to come with new diverse generations of curators or with a new narrative, or what do you think about that?
Wow, two great questions. As far as new spaces, I mean, are you talking about new social spaces or actual physical? Right now, it seems that most of the shows are coming out of.
I mean, maybe new institutions. Yeah.
Yeah, yet to be born, I would say. As far as the curatorial, so I think we're seeing curatorial. How could I say this? Imperatives, right? So you're seeing a lot of shows that largely are dealing with more literal aspects of protest. And so the objects have to, and I kind of feel sometimes, I mean, I think it's totally necessary. I think it's 6 a.m. in the native world, right? So we need this first flash of energy, this first raw kind of anger. But I would like to see, and hopefully, and I think there's a whole group of working PhD candidates now working their way through school, which are native. And I think what will happen, and I'm hoping, is that the native curators will allow for a more complete spectrum because they're coming out of the foundations of where the work is actually coming from. The non-native curator is, I think, somewhat guided by social conditions and protests. And I think people are sort of falling over themselves now just to fill in the gaps and the holes. And that's just where we are. That's the reality of now. But I think as more native people are allowed into these sort of senior positions, you'll see a fuller spectrum, I'm hoping. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was wondering your thoughts on. Thanks, Brad.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. Wonderful. Well, I think now we have arrived at Poetry Hour here at the Rail. So at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our lunch with a poem. We did that before lockdown, and we've carried that into these daily events. And I am thrilled to welcome today our poet laureate, Aria Aber, to the stage. Aria Aber is the author of Hard Damage. She's completed her MFA at NYU and holds fellowships from Kundiman, Dickinson House, and the Wisconsin Institute of Creative Writing. Her poems have appeared in the New Yorker, New Republic, Kenyon Review, Poetry, and elsewhere. And without further ado, Aria, I am passing the mic over to you.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be a part of this conversation. And I'll be reading one poem. Reading Rilke at Lake Mendota, Wisconsin. I have relinquished my shame now that I have mastered what wasn't lent to my name. 3 languages, one of them dead. It is hard to misbeloved all that isn't as absurd as my forked childhood. First of the menses, Padar's stethoscope, to have hours upon hours to marvel at words like driftwood, trope, misbeloved. To miss my life in Kabul is to tongue pears laced with needles. I had no life in Kabul. How then can I trust my mind's long corridor, its longing for before? I have a faint depression polluting my heart, sings the lake. That there is music in everything if you tune into it, devastates me. Even trauma sounds like Traum, the German word for dream. Even in the dirty atrium, Lou was waiting tenderly for Rilke. René, he signed his letters, the apostrophe full of love. Oh, in love I was always and providential, but what I want is not of love. Its meatless mojo and Lyman bore me. I do not want to open, neither for food nor men. For loneliness, I keep a stone to kiss. At night, the entirety of me arches not toward the black square of absence, but toward you. Thank you.
Snapping and clapping. Thank you so much, Aria, for that beautiful poem. I want to thank everyone again in the crowd, to Jonathan, to Dan, to Sebastian, to all the wonderful questions we got that we weren't able to go to today, but thank you for sending those in. I also want to say there's much more you can see on Brad's work and various other bodies of work on his website, and putting that in the chat so that you all can have a look. I also want to mention that this October marks the Rails 20th anniversary, and we are committed to remaining independent, free, and accessible to all. Thanks again. Please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation on Frank Auerbach with Catherine Lampert and Jim Lewis, hosted by our own Fong H. Bowie. We'll conclude with a poetry reading from Alicia Ostriker. You can now all activate your mics and say hello and goodbye on your way out. And thanks again, Brad and Susan and Aria.
Everyone.
Thank you, Brad. That was great.
Thank you,
That
Brad.
was wonderful.
Thanks,
That was
Brad
wonderful.
and Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you
you,
very
Brad.
much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Aria.
Thank you, Aria.
Great poem, Aria.
We'll all meet again.
Aria.
Thanks, Brad.
Yes.
Thanks,
Stay
Susan.
tuned.
Brad.
Stay tuned.
Thanks,
Wink, wink.
Brad. Bye, Brad.
More to come.
Thank
More to
you,
come from the
guys.
rail.
Yeah, we'll do more. We'll do more. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Don't
Thanks,
forget that
Kate.
portrait, Brad.
That's happening. I'm on it.
All right, all right.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Can't wait to see you, okay?
Yes.
Love.
Oh, thanks so much. This is such a wonderful
Thank you,
program.
everyone.
I'm
Bye.
looking forward to
Ciao,
making
Susan.
the portrait